Good morning. I'm just going to continue with my series on the World Championship from 2021 between Jan Nepo and Magnus Carlsen. Uh, it's the ninth game. The first five were drawn. Uh, Magnus won the sixth game after a 136 move marathon. This was really tough for Nepo to come back from, and in the rest of the match, he didn't really show the best chess he is capable of. In the first five games, he played really well. Standard was good, but after the sixth game, no, it was very, very difficult for him. So he managed to get a draw in the seventh game. The eighth game, he blundered a pawn, and it proved to be fatal. A really nicely executed end-game technique from Magnus, but it was a pawn blunder. Excuse me. So we're now in the ninth game. Let's see what happens. So Nepo plays c4, the English defence, and Carlsen plays e6. This is known as the Agincourt defence because it's the English structure c4 against the French structure e6. Of course, the Battle of Agincourt was a famous battle between the English and the French. I think in the Hundred Years' War, but I'm not sure. They were always having wars, England and France. Yeah, anyway. Bishop to g6, good. He's getting ready to fianchetto his bishop to gain control over the d5 square. So Carlsen plays d5 immediately whilst he can, and Nepo plays bishop to g2. Carlsen plays d4. This is risky. That pawn is overextended, and you're going to have to find ways to defend it for the rest of the game. Obviously, knight to f3, you can't defend with the pawn because the pawn itself would be attacked by the knight. And if you defend with the c pawn, then you're really opening up your queen side, and the bishop here is very powerful, and you're making it very difficult to develop your pieces. I played this myself and found this trouble with it. And Nepo, of course, does play knight to f3, most awkward, and Carlsen plays knight to c6, and generally, in a queenside opening, you don't want to be bringing the knight out before you've moved the pawn. If you played the d pawn, you want to move the knight before moving. Want to move the c pawn before moving the knight, because then it will make it very hard to support the c pawn. But we can trust Magnus knows what he's doing. So Nepo castles, and the bishop comes to c5. That's his idea. The knight now on c6 is defending the square d5, e5, so that the pawn can come here. But then that's an even bigger concession of the square d5 if he pushes the pawn. So yeah, the pawn comes to d3. Does support the c pawn, but it's just as much. It's about letting the bishop come into the game. The knight comes to f6, and the knight comes to d2. Obviously, he's looking at heading to this square or this square. Probably more likely b3, because he won't want the structure which occurs after if he plays e4, knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. That structure is probably better for Carlsen than Nepo. Carlsen plays a5. This is it's partly to take space on the queen side, and he exploits that well, but mainly it's to give the bishop a square to retreat to when the knight comes to b3 to attack the bishop. So the bishop can retreat to a7 and keep its eye on the d4 pawn. But he doesn't. He retreats to e7. The pawn is defended by the knight and the queen, attacked by the two knights. So it's safe for now. Just a very unusual and, you know, I think certainly won't be the only player in history to have played this. But only Carlsen would dream of playing in this way at such a high level. He does like the unusual. So the pawn is attacked, and Carlsen realizes that it's pointless to try and defend that pawn, so he takes a change of structure. If he takes with the pawn, then both the D and the E pawn will be weak backwards pawns, and probably weak backwards pawns for a long time. So he takes with the bishop. So he's got 4 against 3 on the queen side, but one of those is really a central pawn. Yeah. So the knight comes to g4. Almost looks like a beginner kind of move, moving the same piece twice before finishing development. But he doesn't waste a tempo because he forces Nepo to make a move. Clever move by Nepo, plays the bishop to c5 so that he's threatening the bishop, and he would be happy for Carlsen to take the bishop, because when the knight comes to here, it's in a brilliant position. So Carlsen castles, he's not going to be taking that, and the pawn comes to d4. And now Carlsen uses the other aspect of the a pawn, that he is able to expand on the queen side and attack the knight. And not just that, if the knight moves, of course, then Carlsen will take the bishop then, because then that structure isn't so good for Nepo, when he would be forced to take off with the pawn and not the bishop, the knight. And so first he takes the bishop. Carlsen's got to take the bishop back since the bishop's attacking the queen, and then the knight takes advantage of that square. So, yeah, smart play again by Nepo. The pawn comes to a3, and it's taken. Doubled isolated a pawns. This pawn is under attack immediately, and yeah, it will be very difficult to defend. But he doesn't take it straight away. He puts pressure on the d pawn with his rook, and the knight comes back to a3, and the knight comes to f6. Rook comes to a1, and now he takes with the queen. And these two pawns here, the c and d pawns on their own, are called hanging pawns. This is a hanging pawn structure. It's similar to but different from isolated pawn structure. Because they're two together, they can sometimes be more powerful than an isolated pawn, but they have some of the same ideas of the isolated pawn. One of the disadvantages is that you only get control of one semi-open file at the side of the isolated pawn because the pawn isn't isolated. So, yeah, but as two pawns together, they're maybe somewhat stronger. And the queen supports the unsupported pawn at the same time as developing, and now he's finished with development. The rooks see each other, the minor pieces are all out, the king's castled in safety. Carlsen hasn't moved his bishop yet, but he doesn't do that now, he moves a pawn. Yeah, is it that he doesn't want the knight coming in here? Is it that he's making a luft for his king? Bit of both, really. And the pawn comes to h4, bishop comes to d7, and on move 19 both players are finished with development, and we can officially say we're in a middle game. So the knight comes to e5. Obviously he would love an exchange here, take the pawn here, and take with the pawn and create a load of space for himself. But Carlsen doesn't do that. He pulls the bishop back. Great. It defends the f pawn, makes the bishop free from attack, and creates a double attack on the d pawn. It's now attacked by the queen and the rook. So the queen defends the pawn, and the queen comes to a better square on d4. b4, sorry. The rook comes onto the same file as the queen, and Carlsen takes the knight now. He's willing to have the pawn double up because now he can attack the queen and the pawn at the same time, so the queen is limited to what she can do. So the queen goes back to e1, so that the rook, to propose a trade of queens, so that the rook will then be defending the a pawn, the d pawn, e pawn. Bound to get it right one time. So he takes with the queen, the rook takes, and he plays h5. This isn't just to support the knight. This is to open up the h6 square, because otherwise, when he plays f3, Nepo, Carlsen's knight is embarrassed, doesn't have anywhere to go. So this gives it a circuitous route back into the game, but a route back into the game nevertheless. Yeah, the bishop is taken, and the pawn is taken on b7, and this turns out to be another blunder by Nepo. It's a bit more complicated, but nevertheless, that bishop is going to get trapped. The idea is that, well, sure, the moves are played. Carlsen comes to a4 to attack the pawn. He can't really defend the pawn. If he defends with the rook, then, yeah. If he defends with this rook, then this pawn gets taken. If he defends with this rook, then this pawn gets taken. So he has to move the pawn. If he just gave up the pawn, okay, that's a better position for Nepo, but he would still have passed a pawn. It would be isolated and weak, but he would still have passed a pawn. But he moves c5 to defend the pawn, but the bishop is now trapped by c6, and that's all she wrote. But you know, he fights hard. He tries to save his bishop, does everything he can. The knight's attacked first. Luckily, it made the square on h6. The rook swap trade is proposed. Of course, Carlsen doesn't agree to that. He's going to attack the bishop, which has nowhere to retreat to. And the bishop is defended by the rook, and both rooks now attack the bishop. He plays a4, and he takes with the a rook. After the swap offs, Nepo might have some hope with the a pawn. He might try and promote the a pawn, but it's stoppable. And I'm sure Carlsen, the great game player that he has had already calculated that he can stop the a pawn in this position. Clever move by Nepo, comes to b6 to create a different pass pawn. Of course, it's taken straight away, but then the rook isn't in the ideal position on b6. So he comes to f6 with his, c5 with his knight, so that when he comes forward with the pawn, the rook has to retreat. He can't go to the a6 square, which you would like. So yeah, Carlsen comes to f5 with his knight, attacks the pawn. The rook retreats to b8. The pawn advances once more, and the knight takes the pawn. This is smart because he will be able to play rook here to stop the pawn from queening, and then he's in a position to play check here and come here with his knight and then he's in a position to play knight here and get a double attack on the pawn on a7. So and now Carlsen moves the pawn partly to attack the knight, but partly so that the rook can so that the bishop can use the c6 square. And it's perfect defender against the a past a pawn. He's taken and he moves to d8. Bit cheeky, but you know, I think he's just showing that you know he can do this in several ways. The knight takes and the rook moves to a8 to stop the pawn, and then whatever happens, he's coming to beat c6, and then the knight can come away. And also, he isn't in a position to play the knight to g. If Nepo could get his knight to g6, then he would have a chance. But as it stands, the 2 squares he can get to g6 from, 3 squares he can get to g6 from d5 covered by the pawn. He can get to g6 from a5 covered by the bishop. He can also get to g6 from c4. But to move 1 square in a straight line is a very slow process for a knight. He could go 1, 2, 3, for example, and in those 3 moves, Carlsen has the opportunity to play check, knight here, and knight here, and then the pawn is overwhelmed and not in a position to defend. And Nepo and Carlsen both know this, and Nepo resigns. Another tragic and maybe a bit more foreseeable blunder. I remember when I was watching this, I saw straight away that the bishop was going to get trapped there. It reminded me rather of there's a famous game from the 1972 match between Fischer and Spassky where Fischer got his bishop trapped behind enemy lines to win a pawn. It wasn't as clear cut a loss, but it was still a loss for Fischer. There's still no way back from getting his bishop trapped. There's some Bobby Fischer didn't talk so much about things. There's some idea that he might have done it deliberately because there is some compensation with which he thought he might have been able to get a draw, but I'm not so sure about that. And Fischer never spoke about that. And of course, after he'd won the World Championship, his sad and inevitable descent into madness had already begun. I say sad and inevitable because you know, he was a fantastic player, Bobby Fischer, a real hero to me. One of the third best players, one of the 3 best players in the history of the game. The 3rd best player, in my opinion. But a deeply flawed individual who probably suffered from paranoid schizophrenia or some other undiagnosed mental illness throughout his life. Yeah, anyway, this was Nepo and Carlsen, and it was Nepo who got his bishop trapped behind enemy lines. Yeah, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe and comment on my videos. Thanks, bye.